I had a guy a few days ago at work at the hospital ask me about the deadlift, and he specifically wanted some tips when it comes to deadlifting. How does he approach it? What's he looking for? What accessory exercises should he be doing? How to approach the whole deadlift thing. And I started telling him all about it, everything I knew. Obviously, we didn't have heaps of time to go through everything, but it kind of got me thinking afterwards that I haven't really done any videos about any of this stuff, how-to videos. I haven't done any of them. The squat, deadlift, bench press, none of this stuff. I've never done any how-to videos. And my approach has always been, well, YouTube is a massive platform. There's millions and millions and millions, if not billions of videos on there already. Why should I make another how-to video? And then kind of that thought simmered in my mind for quite some time. And then I kind of realized, connected a few dots. I realized that it doesn't really matter if there's lots of videos out there explaining how to do something. I think the difference is that you yourself will have a different experience, a different way of interpreting information, and a different way of teaching this information. And so I think it's very valuable, and I myself, to this day, still watch how-to videos about everything, even squat, even deadlift and bench press. So I think even though there's a lot of videos out there of how-to, I still think there is always value in making another one, making another video, and because every person that delivers that video will have their own kind of idea of how to do it. And we all know that every teacher is not going to be the best for everyone. And so I guess the hope for me making this video is to give my way of thinking about the deadlift and what I think about the deadlift in all the years that I've done the deadlift and trained and thought about the deadlift. So I'm gonna make a video today of how to deadlift and then how to improve the deadlift as well. Everything about the deadlift. I'm gonna give you everything that I think about, everything that goes through my mind as I approach the bar, everything that I think about when I'm programming for the deadlift, when I'm trying to focus on the deadlift. So I'll run through it. It's probably going to be another long video, but I feel like, there is some value in this, even for me to kind of summarize these ideas. I think a lot of times that I've taught many different things, whether it's basketball or people at work for clinical procedures or clinical things at work, I always found that it's beneficial even for the teacher, even for me. There's something about teaching and summarizing the information in a bite-sized kind of piece way, rather than having somebody go 10 years, like I have, getting this experience, summarizing 10 years of experience and thought process and how to in one session or one even sentence, I think is very challenging, and it forces you to kind of connect some dots. So here it is. I'm going to run through how to deadlift. So a lot of people, when they come for the first time towards the deadlift bar, and especially the fellow that I spoke to, he thought about the deadlift as picking up a weight off the floor. Even though in layman's terms that is not wrong, we are going to reach down and pick the bar off the floor. But there's many ways of doing this. A lot of people would just walk up to the bar any which way and just grab the bar and pick it up. No thought process. Now, the thing with this is that when you're lifting lightweight, it will behave however you want it to behave. But as soon as you start to approach heavier loads for your frame, when the physics start to get manipulated, you won't be able to lift the bar like this, like a meter away or half a meter away. You won't be able to do this anymore with the bar. Eventually, the physics are going to start to dictate how the movement goes. And so the first thing that I think about when I approach the bar is I need to be a certain distance to the bar. Now, everyone has always said that when you're setting up for the deadlift, first walk up to the bar and look down and have your feet in the middle of the bar, or have the bar cut the middle of your feet. And this is not talking about just the part of the foot that you see from the shin to the toes. No, you're supposed to be cutting the foot entirely. So from the toes to the heel, pick the middle portion of your foot, so you can even look kind of to the side, and set up this way. This is kind of the basis of everything. If you get this wrong, everything is going to go wrong from there on in, because the physics, gravity, how we move, the law of physics will not allow you to move weight efficiently unless you have the base of support or your base set up correctly. So this is a crucial first step. And over the years, I have played around with this so much. So to tell you a little bit about this, I used to deadlift like this, like anyone else. I started deadlifting, with this simple rule set up like this. And then over the years, I kind of worked out that I had some struggles in the deadlift. Specifically, I always struggled off the floor. Now, there's lots of discussion about that in itself, but for me, I found that if I was to just slightly bias my quads in my setup, I have an overall better outcome. So even though the physics, like I talked about, would have you stand with the bar in the middle of your foot, because of my weaknesses, because of my leverages from the ankle up, if I go back a little bit, just ever so slightly, and I have that have that bar just ahead of the middle of my foot, what that allows is more distance to my shin bones. And what that does is that a few things. It allows me to bend more at the knees at the start. That's the first thing. You gain that just because you have more distance. Like if you were to go really, really close to the bar, like opposite to what I just did, and you go the middle of the bar, or the bar is right near your shins. Now you can't bend your knees at all, because if you bend, you're going to push the bar away. So if you do that and you want to deadlift, what's going to happen is you're going to be a vertical shin lifter. So you're going to be purely relying on your hip drive, because when your shin is vertical, shin bone is vertical, you're going to have to bend in the hips. You're going to have to send your hips the other way in order for you to get to the bar. So it's going to look like this. It's going to be basically a stiff-legged deadlift. Very stiff-legged. And when we say stiff-legged, we're referring to that your knees are not involved at all in the lift. It's all in the hips. So because I struggled off the floor for many years, I thought, you know what? How about I move my feet further away from the bar, so then I can bend my knees a little bit more and get my quads involved a little bit more. So the first part of the lift, I'm kind of almost like, not squatting it, but trying to bias a bit more of a squattiness to it. So what I always wanted was, and by the way, when I made this change, my deadlift really started improving. I was stuck on 220 kilos for a number of years, and then when I started to implement this, I went from 220 to 265 in the span of a year, basically, something like that, over 260 in the span of a year. It was really, really profound what this did. And so I went away from the golden rule of setting up with the bar in the middle of my foot. So it wasn't like this anymore. Instead, I was kind of like here. And so setting up in this way allowed me to bend my legs a little bit more, so you can see that I'm kind of more squatty. And then I can feel my quads come on. And then as I start to pull, it's more of a push a little bit and then pull. So everyone that is very, very good at deadlifting will say to you that the deadlift should be a push. So just think about you're grabbing onto a fixed object and you're pushing the earth away. Kind of like a leg press. That's kind of what they wanted to make it seem. But for a lot of us, that is impossible because we're built a certain way. We're built with long legs. Like I have long legs and I can't have that entirely that way. So, but I can bias my quads. So the first thing is, the rule is middle of your foot. But for me, I've kind of adapted over the years and I've gotten a lot of benefit by adapting it. More knee bend. That's the first thing. And so then when I go down, it's more quads, which I need because I struggle off the floor. So that's the first thing. The first thing is always where your feet are in relation to the bar. Still staying with the topic of the feet. So now we know how close we are to the bar. What about the width of your stance? How wide, how narrow do you stand? This is another big topic that I've also played around over the years, and I've been deadlifting now for 10 years. If you have long legs and a short torso as a ratio, if you keep your legs directly underneath you, you are maximizing the distance of your legs, meaning that your long legs stay long. If you go really wide, right, and still pulling conventionally, so we're not doing a sumo, we're not having our hands in between our legs, you're still pulling conventionally, but with a very wide stance, kind of like what strongman guys do. These giants that are 6'5", 6'8", 6'10", whatever they are. There comes a time where there's a trade-off between your foot width and your hand width. So in a conventional deadlift, your hands always have to be outside of your legs. So if you go too wide, your hands are going to have to go wide as well, and it's going to look like this. Now this also resembles how the big guys in strongman pull. Now with this, I feel like I'm more in my legs. However, because my hands had to go a little bit wider to get into the outside of my legs, I'm now not going straight up and down with my hands. So the closest distance between A and B is a straight line. And so if I wanted to maximize my reach, my grip should be straight down, shoulder width, like here. Now, why is that important? Your reach, your arm length, is a great determinant of how good you're going to be in a deadlift. If you have a very long wingspan, like basketball players in the NBA, pretty much all of them have really big wingspans, you're going to be relatively better in the deadlift. This is the funny thing about powerlifting or strong movements, is that your physical makeup, your leverages dictate a lot about the ceiling of some of your strength levels. So if you have really short arms, like T-Rex arms, and by the way, my wingspan is less than my height, so I have a negative wingspan. There's some guys in the NBA who have this, like Bane from Memphis. He's got these really short arms, and they're like visibly short. You can really tell from far away the way he shoots, it's all like short arms. A guy like that is going to struggle with the deadlift. If you combine short arms with long legs, you're going to be a struggle central in the deadlift, because what's happening is, number one, you're far away from the bar, so your legs are really high, so you're going to have to bend over more, right? You're going to have to bend a bigger distance to get to the bar. And then you combine that with the short arms, and now you're basically starting at 90 degrees or parallel with the floor. So your hip angle is basically at 90 degrees in order for you to even get to the position. So in order for me to combat that, I'm going to go back to that first point with the foot stance. In order for me not to start so bent over and in such a huge disadvantage, I've decided to move my feet back a little bit, get into a bit more squatty position, so my back is a little bit more vertical, which, if you know anything about physics, avoiding acute angles allows you to be more proficient in using those muscles. So we are very weak when we bend our legs completely. Like, we have very limited strength when there's such an acute angle of the knee. We're very weak here because all of the muscles are stretched out beyond that strength curve or that torque curve. We are very strong when the muscle is almost locked out. So we're very strong here, quarter squats. We can quarter squat a lot more weight than full ATG. So that's something else to think about. Where do you put the width of your feet in relation to your hands? So what I've always opted out for is I've always gone, okay, I'm gonna have my feet directly underneath me. So keeping my legs long in order to keep my arms also long. So I just want my arms to go straight down and not out this way, because the more out this way I go, if I was to move my feet out, the shorter my reach is, because I'm going out this way more. So I've always gone, you know what? I'm gonna keep my hands straight down to maximize my reach, move my feet back a little bit so I get more quads, and I start here and I pull this way. Now this is the best way I've found it for my build. This is why there's gonna be lots of variation between people, because we're all kind of a mixture of different combinations, right? Some people might have short legs, long arms, like short legs and long arms. So these people are going to be very squatty and very upright in their deadlift, right? Because perfect combination. Some people, like me, not very well built for the deadlift, who have long legs, short arms. So I'm like so far away from the bar, I can't even damn reach it. In order for me to reach it, I have to like bend over fully like this. And if you see some of the best deadlifters in the world, they're practically starting up with a back like this, right? They're starting like this. Now think about it, right? Imagine if I had really long arms. Instead of bending over to get the bar here, my back was here because my arms were so long. Imagine if my arms were this freaking long. I'm basically halfway there already in terms of comparing it to where I am now. This, from here to here, I struggle because it's such a huge angle. I'm starting at 90 degrees. So this is why I struggle off the floor, because I'm starting so bent over. So I need to go away from the optimal foot positioning in order to manipulate some of these rules of physics to delete some of these weaknesses. So even though I'm getting screwed by having the bar a little bit further away from me, I'm getting more back, so there's a net gain, because I get to use my quads a little bit. Because when I bend over completely like this, I can't use my quads at all. But this way, if I shift the butt maximally forward, as much as my dorsiflexion will allow, as much as my ankles will bend, and if I start to pull from here, all of a sudden, I feel so much more explosive in the deadlift. And this was the huge turning point for me back in the day when I was deadlifting. 220, couldn't break it. Because I basically reached a point where my back couldn't overcome the force of 220 anymore, or anything higher. I needed help from my lower body, from the knees, from my quads. So, in terms of stance, there is no rules 100% that apply to you. There are some gradual or general rules, but do not be afraid to manipulate some of these rules in order for you to make it work for you. This is why I always say, man, like this fitness thing that we were obsessed about, you know, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, it's a soft science. It's not like physics. It's not like maths. It's not like some of these hard sciences, like, you know, biology, chemistry, like all these. There's rules and there's 100% rules. Like with us in this sport, there's so much variation. You will see people, all sorts of different types, all sorts of different weird differences making it work. So for me, a little bit further away from the bar, very narrow stance, keep your arms straight down, pull. So that's the feet and the hip positioning. This is me trying to maximize me staying upright. Now for you, you're gonna have to work with yourself to work out what is the best way for you to approach it. That's all I'm gonna say on the feet, I think. That's the first thing I think about, where my feet are in relation to the bar. The second thing I think about is where my shoulders are and what I'm doing with my shoulders. Now, this is probably the most underrated thing when it comes to the deadlift, in my opinion. The fellow that I spoke to the other day at work, at the hospital, he was asking me, how to deadlift. And when I said to him what accessories he should be doing, and now he's a very, very new to the gym. When I said to him what he should be doing, he was surprised. What I was trying to emphasize for him is his upper body development. And he was like, but Ivan, the deadlift isn't that a lower body thing? A lower body movement. The upper body, especially this year, has become such an important aspect of lifting for me that it's kind of dominated a lot of my training. I started doing the 180 AMRAP sets and I realized that it was all upper back. That's where the weakness was for me. That's where I was breaking down. With the deadlift, I feel as strongly, if not more, about the deadlift being a very dominant in the upper back, even more so than the squat, even though I feel very, very strongly about the squat and the upper back connection. The deadlift is basically all about the upper back when you think about it. So once you've set up your feet in the correct position and you've kind of worked out exactly the distance away from the bar, the very next thing that I think about, and I reckon you should be thinking about, is what to do with your arms and what to do with your shoulders. Now, when I say shoulders, what I'm really referring to is the upper back. So when you come down and you grab the bar, what I emphasize the most, what I really want to happen is I want to make sure these shoulders are pushed back into my back pockets as much as possible. So it looks like this. So basically a lat contraction from hell. You need to get so tight in the shoulder girdle and you need to keep that tightness throughout the entire lift, especially from the bottom. Because what the bar is going to want to do to you, as soon as you start to lift it, it's going to want to unzip you. So your shoulders are going to want to lift up and roll forward. Because that's where the weight is. The weight is in front of you. And so it wants to pull you away. Now, if you start to pull the deadlift and you start here, like really depressed and down, like your lats are packed in, and you start to pull the bar and your lats start to give out because they're too weak for that given weight on that given day. And instead of being here, you start to let go and roll over this way. A couple of things are going to happen. You've lost the fight completely because the leverages now are multiplying rapidly against you. So the moment you start to let that happen, your shoulders will roll up. So now the distance between where the weight is being transferred, let's say the shoulder here, the distance between here and where we are hinging is now further away. And if you know basic physics, you will know that you want to limit that lever. The smaller that lever, the less torque the weight can apply to your back, which is that fulcrum. So you want to make sure that shoulder is way down, limit that distance between the hip, where the fulcrum, where we are bending, and the shoulder. If you allow the shoulder to rise and roll over, you're finished. That bar's not going to move and you're going to fail the deadlift. So what I was saying to that guy at the hospital was, are you doing lat pull downs? Are you good at pull-ups? Are you good at rows? He said none of these things to me. He says, oh, occasionally I'll do a few sets of pull downs. So I said to him, probably as a beginner, I would have you do lat pull downs a few times a week, lots of volume, 10 to 20 reps. I want you to feel, I want you to pump up as much blood into that lat, into those lats as much as possible, because I want you to make a mental connection with that muscle. I want you to feel what it feels like to use that muscle. Now, the reason why I didn't say to him, do sets of 5 or 8 or less than 10 reps was because when you are gunning big weight on the lat pull down or you're doing pull-ups, you just want to move weight and it can turn into a lot of arms and biceps and whatever. When you're doing less weight, more reps, you start to get pumped in the muscle. You start to get a pump and hopefully you get some DOMs. And that makes you connect with that muscle, because that connection with that muscle is going to allow you, when you set up for the deadlift, to actually contract that muscle, really latch down on those lats. Because the first thing for me, in terms of deadlift performance, the first thing that I always think about is my upper back ready for this weight? Because if I start to unzip at the top, I'm finished. And so for the first time this year, in ever probably, I've started to really focus on the lats, really focused on the role of the lats in stabilizing the entire system. When we squat, the bars on our shoulders. When we deadlift, the bars in our hands, but that force is going through our arms and into the shoulder again. So no matter what exercise we do in terms of squats and deadlifts, it's always going through the shoulder girdle. And the shoulder girdle is this like loose thing. The scapula is this loose thing. And the only thing that's latching it down is this muscle that we have in our upper body. So we need to make sure this muscle is very, very strong. I don't know about you guys, but in all my years of watching lifting, doing lifting, thinking about lifting, man, I don't know how many times I've seen a guy with relatively skinny legs, man. Like skinny legs, but wide, jacked freaking back and upper body. And these people pull huge numbers on the deadlift. I've observed this a few times, and each time I've kind of been like, what the hell is going on there? Now, a lot of these individuals have good leverages for the deadlift, so they're very, very built for the deadlift, long arms. So couple long arms, with a huge upper back, all of a sudden you're like a gorilla, silverback, ripping the freaking tree out of the ground. So if you have short arms, there's even a bigger emphasis for you to develop your upper back. So number one, for that fella at the hospital, and you might be in the same mix, if you do not have a connection with your lats when you're pulling, that is a massive, massive problem. And a lot of times when I'm setting up for the deadlift, I emphasize this connection with the lats, and you'll see me do this all the time. Like I'll set up for the deadlift, I'll grab whether it's straps or whatever, and I'll be here and I'll raise my shoulders up, like right next to my ears, really stretch out those lats, and then before I pull, I will get the shins down and then rip those lats in. And a lot of times when I do that, the bar comes off the ground. Really, really get those lats in. And the whole time I'm thinking about is flat back, lats down, pull. I can't emphasize that enough. That point is probably the most important aspect of deadlifting, in my opinion now, after all these years, is you need to have a strong back. Now, in terms of what exercises to use for the upper back that will carry over to the deadlift, there's a lot of variation in that. There's many different ways you can target the lats. You can do barbell rows, single or dumbbell, or you can use a myriad of machines. You can do lat pull down, you can do pull-ups, you can do every which way. In my opinion, I think some sort of a horizontal row, so horizontal pull, which is basically a row variation, is going to be best, because I feel like it will mimic the deadlift the closest. When you're doing pull-ups, sure, your lats are getting worked and you are training that shoulder depression, which we want in a deadlift, but it's still good, don't get me wrong, but like it's the way you are set up in a pull-up or a pull down, it's very different to how you are in a deadlift, which is here. So I feel like if you do a movement that trains the lats and you're in a similar movement, in a similar position, like the row, I feel like that trains the lats in the ranges and the positions which are more relevant to the deadlift. I'm not alone in that. There's been many people who have said that rowing is probably the best accessory for deadlifts. Now, the trouble with rowing, when you're comparing it to pull-ups, is that rowing movements, especially barbell and freestanding movements like barbell row, are very heavy. They're very taxing and very costly on the energy that you have. So over the years, I've had this love and hate relationship with barbell rows because I've always felt like, well, I want to make sure that I leave the most amount of energy for the squats and deadlifts. I don't want to have to waste it on an accessory like the row. And I've had that belief for a very, very long time until this year when I started doing the AMRAP sets, pushing 180 kilos for as many repetitions as possible. And I kept finding that I was failing at the upper back. My upper back kept failing. I wasn't able to keep the bar in this position anymore. I started to unzip like at the 7th, 8th, and 10th rep. And then when you let go of the upper back, then now you're just hanging onto your freaking spine, and you soon fail. And you soon failed in all the other systems when the upper back goes. And so I've kind of changed my tune with that, and I've started really focusing on rows. And I do it twice a week now. I'll do rows supinated. Actually, this is my favorite one, supinated, because anytime you're doing rowing and you're maintaining your elbows close to your body, you're doing a lot of lats. So you're rowing like this, whether it's, I mean, you can do it this way as well, but the wrists won't allow it. So if you're doing pronated, it's kind of much harder to row closely with a pronated grip. So I do supinated, at least for my build, it's easier. So elbows really close to the body, hits the lats really well. And then as you start to pan out and row this way and more this way, it starts to hit the traps a bit more. Traps are great as well, don't get me wrong. Traps are very, very important as well. But in order for me to target the lats, I do supinated grip. And so, you know, very, very close. And I just kind of roll this way, like that. So I do 5 sets of that usually in the training session. 5 sets with the pronated. And usually the pronated one, I do like 1 thumb length away from the smooth. So it looks like this. And you know, I end up hitting much higher on my chest when I roll. So when I'm doing pronated, the bar kind of hits me here. When I'm doing supinated, the bar kind of hits me much lower. So I think it's important to mix it all up in that way. So barbell rows are probably the most crucial aspect of deadlifting, especially if you're somebody like me who hasn't focused on the upper body over the years a ton. So now we've come to the point of the setup where we have the feet set, in my opinion, in my case, a little bit further away from the middle of the foot. So I'm kind of a little bit further away from the bar. I'm here. I come down, reach the bar with my hands straight down. So I'm not going at an angle because I want to maximize the reach of my arms. Come down, grab. Lift the shoulders up to my ears. Really stretch those lats out. Think about those lats. Think about how it's going to feel to contract those lats. And then as I come down my shoulders, I go forward with my knees. And then when those two get maxed out, both the knees to the bar and the lats maximum contraction, I start to pull. And I try to get into my quads as much as possible, then I get up. Now, that's the lower body setup, that's the upper body setup. Now, what about the core? This is another big point of lifting, probably the most underrated aspect of lifting in general. People disrespect the core as it's like an afterthought, but really, strength is about minimizing the power leaks that you have in your system. And where you're going to leak the most amount of power is in your core. Why is that? There's a good reason for that. And it's all got to do with your skeleton. Transferring force through something like this is very easy. This is a piece of metal. This is metal. If I grab this metal, if I was strong enough to pick it up, if I was to pick it up, this entire beam of metal will move as I want it. But if, say, this was a spaghetti, a noodle, foam noodle they use in the pool, and I was to grab it here, and this noodle was traveling up, and I picked it up, and I carried it, it would fall and collapse over. Because its density, its consistency, its nature it's very malleable, it's very soft, whereas this is very, very hard. So, in terms of our skeleton, the bones are like the steel. They're very good at transferring force. Our joints in between these long bones is where the power leaks, because this is where the soft tissue lives. This is where ligaments, tendons, muscles, that's where they kind of insert, and this is where power leaks. Now, our arm, this is where it's going to leak, the wrist is going to leak, the elbow is going to leak, and the shoulder is going to leak. But even then, that's a pretty good transfer of force, because there's not a lot of joints in this much of body. But when you compare that, the arm or the leg, to our body, where else do we have lots of joints? From here to here, there are many, many bones and many, many joints. This is why the core is very important, because there's lots of joints, lots of points where the power can leak that we generate in our hips, glutes, arms, lats, all of it. So there are 7 vertical bones or cervical vertebra or cervical bones in our cervical spine. There are 12 in the thoracic spine, and there are 5 in the lumbar spine. That's a lot of bones. And each of these bones is separated by this little disc, which we sometimes herniate and injure, especially in our lower backs. Around these bones and these pillows, these discs, there's a whole bunch of musculature and other organs. Now, in our thoracic spine, we don't really worry about the neck, because usually the weight's being transferred from neck down, unless you're carrying something on your neck. Then your cervical spine becomes important. But for the most part, we are concerned about thoracic spine down. So in our thoracic spine, there are these ribs which add rigidity to the system. And there's organs, lungs, and whatnot. So that's not, we leak power there as well, but it's not as bad as the lumbar spine. The lumbar spine is essentially free, flopping around in space. There is no ribs, there is no pelvis. The pelvis is underneath down here. So we simply rely on our bracing to limit the forces that are leaking through the lumbar spine. So when you're lifting, squat, deadlift, bench, overhead press, this is where you're going to lead the most amount of power. And so if you're interested in strength, this should be a big concern for you, to try and minimize the amount of power that you're leaking through the core. When we say core, we're mostly talking about the lumbar spine area, because this is the biggest leak. And so how do we stabilize that? Well, we take a deep breath in. How do you take a deep breath in? How do you brace? A lot of people talk about it in many different ways. A lot of people use belts in order for that area to get kind of even tighter. But the way I do it is maybe different to many other people. Like many different people have different ways of setting up their feet and arms on the deadlift. The way I do it, and I've tried many different ways, is that I don't like taking a massive breath in. So some people say, do this. And then lift. I feel like when I overinflate with air, I can't tighten anything up. I'm too loose. But if I take medium air, like now I'm really, really strong. Right? Now I'm really, really strong. So I always say to people when they talk about bracing, take medium air in and like just tighten everything up. I'm talking about rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, lock everything up. So it's like somebody's gonna whack you, punch into the guts. That's how I think about it. Now, don't take air into the lungs, as funny as that sounds. Don't go up into your shoulders with that breath. No, it needs to be into your belly button. And the difference is that you want that diaphragm to make the tightness in the lower intra-abdominal pressure. You want intra-abdominal pressure more so than intrathoracic pressure. So one way to kind of work around that idea is just to breathe in through your nose. So for some reason, I don't quite understand why, when we breathe in through our nose, our bellies, we breathe into our belly, into our diaphragm. So medium breath, lock in. Now, when do you take that breath? There's lots of variations with this as well. Some people will take a, it was saying here, go, and then go in. For me, that's too long with one breath. I feel like my blood pressure goes to 300 if I do that. So what I like to do is I breathe normally, set my feet up, measure it a few times, I'm bending the knees to make sure that I have the right distance away, and I'll feel it. Yep, got that. Still breathing normally. Get down here, get my hands right. And then I usually extend my legs and lift my shoulders at the same time as breathing through my nose. So it looks like this. That's how I do it. So I've kind of found a routine, a pre-lifting kind of ritual that I go through every single time. And so knees straight, shoulders up, belly button full of air, and then lift. That's kind of how I do it. Now, bracing is going to be very, very different to basically everyone else that listen to this. Some people swear by using a belt. Now, I'm not somebody that's used a belt many times at all. This is a very new piece of equipment for me, and I'm not very good at it at all. And I'm not very good at using it. But from what I've heard from a lot of different people is that this tool will make it easier for you to lift because it will enhance the intra-abdominal pressure that you can generate, because now you have an external source as well applying force into that area of the body. So now you have the belly button expanding because of the air. You have the muscles latching down because of their contraction. And now you have this external thing as well over the top, also contributing to that intra-abdominal pressure. Intra-abdominal pressure is probably the most important aspect of anything. If you're going to take a punch to the guts, if you're going to go dig a very, very heavy, shovel full of stuff, you go, like you do everything with bracing. Bracing is very, very important. So it's a huge part of lifting, but there's going to be very varying differences how people do it. Like I said, some people take so much freaking air, their eyeballs pop out. And you can see the intracranial pressure is like through the roof for them. I don't like that. I also feel like there's risks to health if you take that much air in. I don't know whether you've ever heard this, but in that moment when you are lifting a maximum weight and you're straining in that universal sticking point, our blood pressure can go up to like 300, 350 millimeters of mercury in that moment. So our normal blood pressure is 120 on 80. In that moment, it can go up to 350. So those blood pressure readings are humongous. And the reason for that is that all of that pressure that we accumulate through our bracing and through the weight in our hands or the back, all of that pressure needs to be offsetted with intra-abdominal pressure, right? So there's a lot of pressure going through our spines. And in order for us to continue to perfuse our brains and organs, we need to increase our blood pressure in order for us to still circulate our brain and other organs. And so you don't want to spend a lot of time in that moment, but it's necessary, because if you don't brace, you won't be able to lift as much weight. I think there's been studies done on this, and they've said that there is no direct correlation between heavy lifting and adverse events like strokes and heart attacks or bleeds or something like that. There hasn't been any data to support it, but they theorize that it's not probably the greatest thing for us, but short bursts of that is okay, because the overall net gain is still beneficial when you're training versus not training. So it's one of those things that sometimes crosses my mind when I'm doing too much heavy lifting too often. I sometimes think to myself, man, how good is that for the vessels in my brain, for the vessels on my heart, for the blood vessels in my body, to be exposed to so much blood pressure spikes throughout the day, throughout the week. This is something that's kind of popped out in my mind many times in my training career. So Bracing is very, very important. Part of bracing is increasing your blood pressure so you don't faint. Some people faint because of improper bracing, and some of these people, like I mentioned before, they take breath into the upper, like into the thorax, so their intrathoracic pressure goes through the roof, and a lot of them you'll see like the veins in their neck bulging out like heaps, and yeah, I don't know, like they pass out because they're not getting enough circulation to their brain. And so we've all seen videos of people fainting while lifting. I mean, you definitely don't want to do that. Some of these people end up falling, hitting their head. I mean, you can die from a head strike like that when you faint and your head freaking slams against a piece of metal or bar or whatever. It's very dangerous. So I've seen it at the Olympic level as well with the Olympic weightlifters. You know, some of them, like, they clean the way, they stand up, and they're getting ready for the press or the jerk, and they just simply can't do it, and they just drop the bar because the circulation their bracing hasn't been good enough. So you want to overcome the pressure, the external pressure on your body with internal blood pressure in order to kind of still perfuse your organs. So I guess that's enough on that. Bracing is very important. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at it, but I think I've kind of worked out what works for me. So bracing is very, very important. Now, while we're talking about bracing, how do you improve bracing other than the technical stuff that we talked about? How do we improve the bracing? Well, you got to train the core. For a long, long time of my training career, I used to think that just simply doing squat, bench, and deadlift was enough training for the core. You don't have to do any accessories. Heavy lifting should do it. I've since learned otherwise. I think it's very, very important for you to train the core directly. How do you train the core? It's another topic for huge discussions. Lots of different people have lots of different opinions. I'm of the opinion that I like sit-ups. A lot of people don't like sit-ups, but I really like sit-ups. Some people would say that the core should be trained isometrically. So you should be training the core with something like planks or dead bug. Basically anything which has you bracing and resisting rotational forces, flexion extension forces. So something like a farmer's carry, a suitcase carry, a plank, dead bug, something like that. Now I've done a lot of that, and I'm not going to say that that's not effective, but what I like better is sit-ups or hanging leg raises, something that induces flexion through the hip. And the reason why I think that is because I think that's what we're trying to achieve when we are lifting. We are going through flexion and extension of our hip. Sit-ups are flexion of the hip. We are bending at the hip. Now, some people think like, no, but you're also flexing at the spine. I don't think so. So during a sit-up, you are flexing your hip and you are holding a hollow body position here. So I'm not doing crunches. That's not what I'm trying to do with sit-ups. I'm holding a hollow body and I'm just simply doing sit-ups with my feet hooked on the ground. This wrecks my core more than anything. So it trains the hip flexors, which, like I said, I've heavily used in squats and deadlifts, while maintaining the hollow body position. I think those type of movements are the most effective because there is hip flexion with isometric hold of the hollow body while you are doing that movement. That's how I think about it. Now, I've seen other people also use weighted sit-ups as well. I've seen Clarence Kennedy's program, lots and lots of decline sit-ups. I've seen many other people use sit-ups, leg raises, swinging wipers, leg raises, all sorts of things. So this is something that you're gonna have to kind of play around with, see what works for you. But I definitely would recommend for you to train your core directly and not just rely on all of these other exercises to get your core strong. This is probably the most important aspect of strength, is the ability to latch down and prevent the biggest leaking area of power in our body, which is that lumbar spine. So when you roll all of that up, now you have an understanding how to deadlift. Approach the bar, middle of the foot or thereabouts, like I've explained. Grab the bars with your arms, maximizing the length of them, which is straight down. Ledge down the lats, really ledge down the lats. Keep your back straight and lift the bar up. That's basically what I think about. This is how I would teach anybody to deadlift. A lot of deadlift success, a lot of deadlift safety is about the setup. If you set up wrong, you're going to be lifting it wrong. You need to set up right in order for the thing to go well. Now, it's very hard to give general opinions on what you should be working on. Everyone has a weakness. Everyone has a lagging body part. You're going to have to work that out for yourself or get a coach. But for every lifter, there's going to be something that they need to work on. The way I think about it is like this, man. There's multiple different bars on a graph. Like if you think about a y-axis and an x-axis, let's put all of your muscles in a bar. And in order for you to lift a certain weight, these bars need to be at a certain height. Now, each of us will have a bar on that graph, which is the rate limiting step. Sometimes you think it's lats, sometimes you think it's glutes, it's quads, it's whatever. But until that rate limiting step is addressed, you cannot lift a heavier weight. So this is kind of the art part of the whole training journey, is that you need to work out what's failing you the most. And sometimes it's not obvious. And in fact, a lot of the times it's not obvious at all. Like it's really actually confusing to work out what's going on. And I guess this is the basis for my journey, is that I'm kind of showing you guys the working out process of how I'm going about this journey. I'm not an expert. I'm not somebody that's world renowned or anything like that. I'm not a world record breaker, but I'm kind of actively trying to work out what's going on. The current system that I have for the deadlift has worked really well. And you saw, I told you that I went from 220 to 265 essentially in 1 year, after I discovered to move the feet back a little bit and then allow more knee travel forward. That was huge. Am I ever going to have another run of progress like that on the deadlift? Maybe if I work out what the rate limiting step is, like from 220 to 265, it was predominantly just a slight tweak that kind of allowed the floodgates to open and for me to kind of have a huge run of strength gains again. But that's kind of how it works. It's like a step-loaded thing. It's not a linear thing. It's like, let's call it a plateau, and then you address the limiting factor, then boom, you take a step, and then plateau, until you kind of find the next thing to address. Eventually, when you get to like super heavy weight, it's going to be very hard to maintain the strengths and also bring up the weaknesses. So it becomes very difficult. And this is kind of where we start to hit the genetic limit. And then some of these guys who are deadlifting 500 kilos, it becomes so freaking hard to target every single part of our body and recover and eat and all that stuff. So, but for most people, you know, a 2 times body weight deadlift should be attainable for sure. You know, when I started deadlifting, I was shocking. I was actually really afraid of it. I didn't do a lot of deadlifting at all when I first started because I was so afraid of it. I just focused on the squat. But 180 kilos, so a 2 times body weight deadlift, took me, I want to say, like 3 years. I want to say something like that, 3-4 years, something like that. And then from 180 to 200 or 220 took me another 2 years. And actually right now I'm in the midst of nearly a 3-year plateau, probably more than 2 years, of not improving on the deadlift from 265. So in this time I've done improvements in other lifts, but not in the deadlift. So it just goes to show you how difficult it is to find what's weak and to progress it while also looking after the bench press and squat and other, you know, endeavors. And a lot of times I think to myself, I think the deadlift weakness and the squat weakness and the two plateaus are related. There's something that's screwing up both of those lifts, and you got to find that. And that's kind of the fun part of it, at least for me, is that it takes so long to kind of progress, and it takes so long to finally intellectually work out what's wrong, and then put the work in and then see the physical result. I think that's, I don't know, for me at least, some of the most funnest crap around. It's a long burn hobby, but it's so super fun. So hopefully that was helpful. My way of teaching the deadlift, my way of telling you what's important in the deadlift. It's a long video again, but it's a long-winded one where I talk about what I think about when it comes to the deadlift and what I prioritize when it comes to the deadlift. Hopefully it makes sense. Remember, core is important, lats are very important, and don't be afraid to play with your setup to maximize the leverages that God's giving you. The cookie cutter deadlift setup might not be the most effective for you. Don't be afraid to move your limbs around with even rotation of your feet. Play around to kind of get the best bang for your buck for what you have. Appreciate you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.